Hi friends, today I'll tell you about a science fiction movie in your favorite category called Howl. Joe, a railway guard, finishes his shift at London Station. He is refused a promotion request and is upset by the failure. Suddenly the senior duty officer informs him that one of the inspectors is ill and Joe is sent on the route instead. Joe doesn't really want to leave at night, but on this route works his unrequited love, a beverage seller named Ellen. Joe boards the carriage and begins his duties of checking tickets. In one compartment, he gets scared by a small dog. Another passenger lost her ticket and he has to find her, while another girl talks very loudly on the phone, even though this carriage is considered a quiet zone, disturbing others. In general, everything is as usual. Suddenly, Ellen appears with her trolley. Joe asks her out after the trip, but she refuses as she's tired and has another shift in the morning. Joe has to act like everything is okay. He finally finishes checking everyone and can relax. Joe sits by the window, gazing at the full moon peeking through the clouds and rain. Suddenly, the brakes are applied, and the train makes an emergency stop in a dense forest. Joe rushes to the front, but an announcement comes on, and the driver reports that the train has hit something and he's going to investigate, asking everyone to stay in their seats. Joe returns to the carriage where Ellen has dropped her goods. One of the passengers helps the girl gather them, and Joe joins the pair, but she asks him to check on the passengers, and the guy leaves. Meanwhile, the driver is inspecting the carriages. It's raining, it's dark outside, and the man can't figure out what happened. Meanwhile, the passengers start complaining to Joe because the final station is quite far away, and no one wants to be stuck in the forest. The guy calms the people down, trying to contact the driver, but he does not respond to the calls because at that moment he finds a dead deer stuck under the wheels. He tries to remove the animal, and at that moment a monster, which was hiding in the bushes, attacks him. The people on the train start to get nervous, as if sensing that something terrible has happened, but they attribute it all to the unusual situation. Joe and Ellen rush to the driver's cabin, but no one is inside. The driver himself does not respond to calls, and explaining to the passengers what happened, nobody can. Joe tries to see what's going on outside, but it's too dark. Then the guy calls the dispatcher and reports the situation, but he can't say anything for sure. Trees fell due to the storm and damaged the communication lines, so the rescuers will not be able to reach the train for at least 4 hours. Upon hearing this, the passengers go into a frenzy because nobody wants to be stuck in the forest all night. Joe has to admit that they've also lost contact with the driver. "Okay," says the character's name. "I'll find the driver myself and find out when he plans to get us to our destination." Everyone finds a reason why they absolutely need to get home immediately. People pounce on the poor guy with complaints. Adrian, one of the passengers, stops the shouting. He suggests that those who don't want to wait should just go on foot through the woods. It's only 5 kilometers to the station. Besides, they might catch a signal and call for help. Joe tries to persuade everyone to stay, as it's against the rules, and he could get fired if something happens to the passengers. He even refuses to open the doors, but after pressure from the people, he eventually gives in and is the first to jump onto the embankment. Joe lines up those willing to walk and asks them not to stray from each other. Adrian helps the weak descend and supports Ellen, which Joe doesn't like at all because he's jealous. Suddenly there's a noise ahead in the bushes. People suggest different theories, from an animal to the returning driver. Joe goes ahead to check it out. Ellen catches up to him as she also works for the railway, but after walking a few meters, the pair finds the gutted body of the driver, which makes them hurry back to the train. However, the creature, which turns out to be a werewolf, chases them. The passengers barely make it back to the carriage and climb inside, but then Joe notices that the elderly couple, Jed and Jenny, have fallen behind. He shouts at them and urges them to hurry. The man climbs into the carriage, but his wife gets bitten on the leg by the pursuing werewolf. Of course, in my opinion, it's very funny that the werewolf couldn't catch up to the elderly couple. Anyway, let's move on. With great difficulty, the people close the doors and pull the injured woman away from the entrance. The women help her by bandaging her torn leg with found rags, while the men try to see what's happening outside, but it's too dark to see anything. However, they can hear the sound of claws scratching the side of the carriage and a terrifying howl. While the survivors try to make sense of what happened and calm down, Joe makes his way to the driver's cabin and tries again to call for help, but there's only silence in response. Billy, the engineering student whose father works for the railway, realizes that the train has a damaged fuel line, and if the leak isn't fixed, it will be impossible to go any further. Job announces this to the passengers, but people don't want to wait in the cars. Also, Jenny needs medical help. By this time, the woman has regained consciousness and says that it wasn't a bear or a wolf that attacked her. He looked like a human. The passengers dismiss this as delirium, but then everyone hears noises coming from the next car. Joe, Billy, and Adrian, armed with a fire extinguisher, go towards the sound and see the door of the broken restroom shaking. But when Adrian is about to lower the cylinder on the head of the person coming out of the restroom, a passenger emerges who hasn't read the malfunction warning but still got stuck in there. The guy barely comes to his senses and can't believe what's happening. Moreover, they've already passed his station. Over time, Jenny's condition worsens. Fever sets in, her leg swells, and Ellen notices that this bite looks like nothing she's seen before. Apparently, she's encountered many bites. The passengers try to cheer each other up. And when the beast breaks in, we will need to sacrifice a name to survive. Well, to escape. Jenny's outpouring is interrupted by severe vomiting. At the same time, her remaining teeth fall out, and people don't know what to do when Joe notices that the passenger who was stuck in the toilet is missing. He goes to the neighboring carriage and finds him there again, but the doors won't open. Joe hears screams and sees blood seeping through newly appeared claw marks. He realizes that the werewolf is already inside the carriage and runs to the remaining passengers. Adrian tries to close the grids in front of him, but the women throw themselves at the coward, and Joe manages to run into the carriage. The werewolf continues to break through the passengers' barricades, but people help each other, and when the monster breaks in, they attack it and hit the creature with everything they can find. The werewolf is finally finished off by a guy who found a fire axe. After regaining their composure, people examine the creature. Suddenly, one of them notices the monster's teeth and recognizes it as a classic werewolf. He has wolf's teeth and legs, so he is some kind of human-wolf hybrid, and he has a wedding ring on his hand, which means he was once a human. Adrian remembers the legend where people got infected after being bitten, and then tells about an accident in '63, when a train derailed somewhere around these parts. When help arrived, there was no one to save. Only scraps of clothing and body parts lying around. No one ever learned the truth back then, and at that moment, the creature suddenly lets out a howl. Adrian finishes him off with a fire extinguisher, but then strange sounds are heard from where Jenny is sitting, and people notice changes in her appearance. It becomes clear that the woman is mutating. Adrian tries to kill Jenny, but her husband and the other passengers prevent him from doing so. Joe knocks the man unconscious with a blow to the head and asks to tie him and Jenny up. After that, Billy starts fixing the train. He shows Joe and Ellen what to turn on in the cabin, then goes outside to the fuel line. The guy with the little axe accompanies him. Billy finds the breakpoint and dives under the carriage, while Ellen asks Joe not to be upset about not getting the promotion, because he is a real man, brave and courageous, who helped everyone survive, but of course she won't date him. Meanwhile, Billy wraps the fuel line with electrical tape, and his partner suddenly hears the voice of the missing girl calling for help from the bushes and steps away from the carriage. He searches for her, hoping to save her, but only sees the remains of a body being devoured by another werewolf. The terrified guy runs to the train, but he is surrounded by a whole group of monsters. The survivors in the train hear the screams and realize that it's not over yet. Jenny starts her transformation. Adrian asks to be untied before it's too late, and at that moment the fuel line is activated. The cockpit lights up. Joe and his girlfriend are overjoyed and perform the actions Billy taught them. Meanwhile, he sees an approaching werewolf. Realizing they can't wait for the engineer, Ellen pulls the lever and the train starts moving. At this moment, Jenny completely mutates, breaks free, and attacks the passengers. Kate frees Adrian, and he, seeing the monster's claws reaching into the carriage, opens the doors and throws Kate out, diverting the attack from himself. Jenny eventually transforms into a full-fledged werewolf and kills her husband, and Adrian tries to fight her off, when Billy, who is still under the train, cuts the fuel line and the train stops again. Joe and Ellen run into the carriage and manage to destroy Jenny before she finishes off Adrian. Unfortunately, the other werewolves manage to get onto the train without a ticket, and Adrian lures Joe and Ellen into a trap to cover his escape. He jumps out, leaving the pair in the carriage with the werewolves, and suddenly, Billy returns to the carriage, trying to fend off the werewolves with torches. He kills several of the creatures, ordering Joe and Ellen to run, but heroically dies himself. The couple rushes into the forest, pursued by a pack of monsters. Realizing they have no chance, Joe stays behind to fight them off while the girl runs away. Although Joe fights bravely, he's bitten by the head werewolf and becomes a monster himself. Meanwhile, Ellen safely reaches the nearest station. Meanwhile, Adrian wanders through the glowing forest and suddenly encounters a pack of werewolves and is attacked by the recently transformed Joe. What can I say? It's kind of a genre film, not that bad overall. As they say, the atmosphere is an acquired taste, the decorations are there, the locations exist, they even brought in a few monsters. But at the same time, there's some incoherent plot with dumb characters. Well, as usual, I think it can be worth a watch for a laugh, and then forget it. In general, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, give it a like, and comment if you've watched this movie in its entirety.